On this special edition of Big Drive Energy, we've got Lou Stagner. If you're on golf Twitter, you know him as Golf Stat Pro. He is the assistant coach at Princeton University, as well as the data lead for Arccos Golf. This is going to be an awesome interview. You're going to want to watch this one. If you're listening to this pod, tune into the YouTube. He's hopping on with us here in a second. It's going to be great. And this is all brought to you by, of course, our guys, Pins and Aces. Got the gear on today. They are the best golf company in the world. They got a whole new Masters line out. It's selling out quick, so make sure you head over to pinsandaces.com. Use that promo code BDE, and you will receive 15% off your entire bill. They always do like Warehouse Wednesdays where they give away. So if you order stuff on Wednesdays, they'll give some of the orders away and give you free stuff and give you money. Like they do a ton of stuff. They're a local-based golf company here in Colorado, but they sell all around the world. Best polos, best hats, best golf bags, and the beer sleeve and the liquor stick. I can go on and on. Just check out pinsandaces.com, promo code BDE for 15% off. All right, now we'd like to welcome on, if you are on golf Twitter, you know him as at GolfStatPro, Mr. Lou Stagner, also the assistant golf coach at Princeton University. They're making a little Sweet 16 basketball run right now.
Yeah.
Some excitement around the campus, but thanks so much for taking the time to join us, and welcome to Big Drive Energy.
Thanks for having me, guys. Good to be here.
Awesome, man. So first of all, like Spencer said, you guys are making a little run at the Sweet 16 here. What's the buzz been in that area with the basketball team doing what they're doing?
Yeah, I think everyone's pretty excited. So they, Sweet 16 is a 15 seed, and the women's team, they won their first round game, got knocked out in the second game. But yeah, I think everybody's pretty excited. It's always fun when the team does well and moves on, and especially when you're that much of an underdog to get to Sweet 16. Elite Eight would be pretty cool. Has it been done? I don't know. Did I look? I think it's been done once. A 15 seed getting the Elite Eight last year, right?
Last year, St. Peter's. Yeah, I believe that was the one.
Yeah, so it'd be cool to do it 2 years in a row and see Princeton be a part of it. Friday night, 9:00, Creighton. So we'll see. Unfortunately, I have to leave the next morning for a tournament with Princeton, and I have to be in my car by probably 5:15 a.m. I'm gonna have to be up by like probably 4:30. So a 9:00 game on Friday night it's less than ideal. Less than ideal timing for that, but we'll figure out a way to make it work.
Yeah. So let's, well, first of all, I want to tell all of our listeners about your podcast, Hack It Out, and then your weekly newsletter. I've been subscribed to that basically since it started, and it's an incredible tool for amateurs and I put this in quotations, professionals like myself that are around scratch golfers. It's so widely varying on all the stats and all the things you can learn from it. So thank you for doing that. And then how has that been, writing each week and doing the podcast?
Well, thanks for the shout outs right up front. I appreciate that. It's great. So I've been doing the podcast now since over 2 years. We started at the tail end of 2020, December of 2020, myself, Mark Crossfield, and originally Scott Fawcett. And then Scott left the podcast. He got so busy with what he's doing with Decade. Left the podcast, a year and a half ago now. And Greg Chalmers joined the podcast in his place. Greg's just about ready for the Champions Tour. He played many, many years on the PGA Tour. He's got probably 350, 400 starts on the PGA Tour. He won back in, I think, 2016. And we get together, once a week and record a few episodes and get to shoot the breeze about golf. So it's a lot of fun. And then the newsletter I started back in December. So maybe 3 months into it now. And I try to send something out every week. I don't always achieve that. It's tough to get through some of the issues and write everything down. If you need me to do a math problem, I'm probably much better suited for that than to write something that needs to be readable by people. So sometimes it's challenging for me to get through it and put it together, but it's been going great. A lot of good feedback, and some topics that I hope people find interesting and informative, and able to leverage some of that info for their own games. And it's great. Pretty much every issue is going to be on some component, some facet of amateur data. And I get to play around in the Arccos database for all that, which is, creeping up on 700 million shots now, which is pretty insane. So there's really not anything that I don't have enough shots to look at and investigate, which is pretty cool.
That is super cool. I wanted to say real quick that I remember Greg Chalmers, and I'm sure you have the stats on him, but he's probably one of the best putters I've ever seen.
Yeah.
I remember watching him back in the day, and he's a lefty. He's a smaller dude, probably about my size, and that dude could roll it as good as anybody I've ever seen. So that is one thing that comes to the top of my head.
Statistically, he's if you look at it like on a strokes gained per putt basis, he is statistically in the top 3 in the shot link era. Him, Brad Faxon, and Denny McCarthy were 1, 2, 3. I haven't looked at it in a little while. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, he's a really good putter. And in the 3 to 5 foot range, he is the best putter in the 3 to 5 foot range in the shot link era. Since we have data, I wish we could see what Tiger was like in 99, 2000, 2001 in that range. But from 2004 and onwards, Mr. Chalmers can roll the rock. That is for sure.
Yeah. 100%.
So going back even before this, before the newsletter, before the podcast, how did you get into, let's just start with golf, period?
I started golfing, as a kid, not a diehard golfer, played a lot of other sports growing up. And when I first started, I played left-handed, and played lefty until, I was 20, 21, right in that. And I switched over to righty. I had torn my right ACL, and it made it really hard to finish as a lefty on the right side. And I really wasn't a diehard player as a lefty. I could, occasionally break 90, probably with generous gimmies. Just went out with my buddies in the summer, and just to kill some time. And then after I had my knee surgery, I wasn't at a point where I could really play yet, but I could get around. And so I went in my yard that summer and would just load 100% of my weight on my left side and hit little 20-yard shots, 30-yard shots right-handed, and ended up staying with that. And when I first got back out on the golf course, I would play right-handed through like my 8-iron, and then if 9-iron and wedges would be left-handed. And so I'd go out and I'd be with buddies. If we'd get paired up with somebody that didn't know me, they would see, they'd eventually go, wait a minute, didn't you just hit that shot right-handed? And I'm like, yeah, but you're playing left-handed now. And then they'd look in my bag and be like, what's going on? And they would just blow people. I wasn't very good. I was still really new, but it just blew people's minds that I was out there. And eventually when my right leg got stronger and better, and I got better at golf, I switched everything over to right-handed except for the putter. I still putt lefty. I'll never change that. So that I've been golfing for a long time now. Got really into it. Got down to right around scratch. Never got to the plus side. 0.1 was the best index I ever had. Played low single digits for a lot of years. Was good enough to occasionally, qualify for a state am where I was, but never good enough to, be a threat in any way, shape, or form. And was good enough to occasionally put a decent round on the board, like in a local tournament. But again, never a threat to be good, if that makes sense. So it's just been a passion forever. And about 5 years ago now, I started a blog on golf analytics. And I've told this story a million times, and it was legitimately just to kill some time in the winter. I live up in the Northeast, and I only intended to to do it during the winter months. And then when summer got here, you know, I wouldn't have time. I'd be out on the golf course, and it took off pretty quickly. And I ended up, you know, meeting a few people, getting to work with a few people along the way. And then it's just grown in ways that I never, you know, intended or never thought possible. So it's been a pretty awesome ride. It's been a lot of fun. And lastly, before I stop rambling here, my background is in analytics. I've been working in analytics for over 20 years now. So it was very easy for me to blend together, you know, what I've been doing for a couple decades combined with golf to try to extract good and actionable information from all of these golf stats. So that's kind of the journey in a nutshell. And, you know, here we are, you know, almost 5 years later now.
That's amazing. And now, so two things from that I got. Now I don't feel as crazy when I try to putt left-handed, because as you said, Greg may be the best putter from 3 to 5 feet. I may be the worst in the world from 3 to 5 feet. So I actually did mess with putting with left-handed for a while.
Yeah.
And the only thing that bothered me was the thing that helped me was the eyes. Like I'm right eye dominant, so I felt like that helped on the shorter putts. But the further away putts, I didn't feel nearly as comfortable. So now I'm not as crazy for doing that. I can just tell them Lou Stagner does it. I can do it.
Yeah, well, I didn't switch that way because you know, I've always putted that way and just never changed the putter. I've always been a pretty decent putter. It's unfortunately the only part of my game that's ever really been decent. I'm a horrific ball striker. I grew up in an era where, you know, I wish we would have had these stats when I started playing golf, you know, 25 plus years ago, because I would have spent a whole lot more time on my swing. It was drive for show, putt for dough. So I took that to heart and put in a significant amount of time on my putting. And that was definitely a mistake. If I could rewind, I would have spent a whole lot more time on my swing and went to see somebody, and I would be a whole lot more functional as a player, I think, instead of scraping it around the way I do with the train wreck of a swing that I have. But it's interesting you say about lead eye dominance. You know, I'm right eye dominant, so lead eye when I putt. And I have been talking to a few people about that. And, you know, we talked about the 3 best putters in ShotLink history: Faxon, McCarthy, and Chalmers. And 2 of those 3 are lead eye dominant. In which I've talked to a couple of other people about this. I've wanted to, you know, try to track down that info on, let's say, the top 20 putters in the ShotLink era to see if they skew more towards being lead eye dominant, because I've always wondered if it is an advantage on short putts, which is where, you know, it's a huge, huge area. For tour pros, you have to be able to putt pretty well inside of 10 feet. There's a lot to be gained or lost in that spot. So I'm really curious. Something I wish I had more time to really pursue, because I wonder what the impact actually is of lead eye dominance on putting.
Yeah, well, and it's such a simple thing in golf, but like Mitchell knows how bad of a putter I am. I'll line up to a 3-footer that's dead straight, and he'll be, if it's a scramble or whatever, he'll be behind me, and I'm like, yeah, I'm, you know, dead in the center, no break, and he's like, dude, you're outside right, and I can't. It's just, and I don't know if it's just me or that's just a general thing for everybody based on the way, you know, that you have to stand over the ball and then kind of look to the side, but my aim is with full swing. I can get it a little better. I know I feel a little left. I'm a little open on my stance. So I feel like my club face is aimed at the target, but when I putt, it's not good.
Well, we need to work on that. We need to tighten that up a little bit.
He's not a big fan of practicing. I was always the one that was the grinder. I've never really kept stats on myself, but I would say inside of 10 feet, I'm pretty damn good. I don't really hit it that far, which is nowadays a big issue in professional golf. If you don't hit it far,
Right.
We'll get into that. But on kind of the topic of analytics, how much do you use analytics like to your benefit in your game? And like also with coaching the guys at Princeton, like, I guess there's no real like definition, but is there such a thing as too much analytics like on the golf course when you're playing, or would you rather your players and you personally know kind of every situation and what the statistics are behind it to benefit you?
Well, I'm going to answer that a few different ways. One, as far as, what you're going to do on the golf course with tracking your stats, keeping your stats, people have different personalities. I am part of Arccos, and I use Arccos, and the Princeton team uses Arccos as well to track their stats while you're playing, which you kind of kick it off. It's an app. It has sensors that attach to your club, and it's automatically tracking everything for you while you're playing. And there's really nothing you need to do. But there's some people that, will track stats manually. They'll do it on the scorecard. Me years ago, for many, many years, I track stats at the shot level on my scorecard. And I had a system that, you'd look at it and you'd be like, I didn't even know what language this is. What is it? What is this here? And so I would track everything at the shot level and everything it would have, and I'd come back and I'd enter it into a spreadsheet. And my personality is such that it worked for me. It's no problem. It's second nature to me, and I don't get uncomfortable doing that. I don't get distracted by it. But there's some people that's the last thing they want to do. And I would never force that on anyone. So I would say most people should avoid thinking about that, worried about that, focused on tracking stats while you're on the golf course, and use something like Arccos that it's going to do it for you. Now that data, whether you like stats or not, whether you want to track them and be engaged with them while you're playing on the golf course, you need to know them afterwards. You have to know these afterwards. So you saying I'm a pretty good putter inside of 10 feet, I would argue you probably really don't know. Like anecdotally, you know, and we're all full of confirmation bias sometimes on what we think is happening. And what we think can be happening can be very different from reality, which is why tracking your stats is extremely important. Like I would want all of my players, when I ask them how it's going, I would want the answer to be, I was averaging 0.27 per round in strokes gained putting, and that's down a half a stroke my last 10 rounds. Like, something's off with the putting. I would want them to be able to know and understand that. And that's really important because everybody's different, and everybody has different strengths and weaknesses. In knowing what you are good at and what you are not good at allows you to focus practice time effectively, especially for us amateurs that, we have jobs, we have families, we have commitments. We can't practice and play 8 hours a day every day. So we don't have unlimited time. So for the few hours and minutes that we do have to put into practicing to try and get better, if you can focus that in an area that needs a lot of work, that's really important. And that can be really beneficial. Now we can make some generalizations depending on skill level. And I've given this example a few times before. The three of us, we could all be 10 handicap players. We get on the first tee. What's your handicap? I'm a 10. I'm a 10. I'm a 10. All right, cool. We're not playing with any strokes today. Straight up. Awesome. But one of us could be in the bottom 5% of putters for 10 handicaps. And if you're in the bottom 5% of putters as a 10 handicap, you putt like the typical 20 handicap. Another one can be an average putter for a 10 handicap. And the third could be in the top 5% of putters, which you would putt like the typical scratch player. If you're in the top 5% of putters as a 10 handicap, you putt like the typical scratch. So we have three players, all 10 handicaps. One of them putts like the typical scratch. One of them putts like the typical 20. There's about 5 shots per round difference in those skill levels. And so generically, I would be telling a 10 handicap, you probably, if you want to get better, you probably really need to focus a ton of time on your ball striking. But in this example, which isn't, this isn't made up. This isn't some hypothetical. There's people out there that fall into this, like that I see and that I look at. That's how I have these stats and have these numbers. The person that putts like the typical 20, they have a lot of low-hanging fruit potentially to take that skill level. And even if they make it like they're the average 10 handicap putter, that's 2.5 shots, 2.5 shots, somewhere in that range. And you can go from a 10 to being an 8 or a 7.5. If that 20 handicap, if that player that putts like a 20 handicap got really good at putting and maintained the rest of their skill level and got down to putting like a scratch player, that's 5 shots. They'd go from a 10 to a 5. So depending on your skill level and what you need work at and what you don't, knowing this allows you to focus your time intelligently to try to get better quicker. I know it's a lot of words, and sorry that I'm rambling, but it's such an important piece of the puzzle for everybody to have, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And there is a lot of people that I'm sure you deal with out there that don't want to deal with stats, the eye test, this and that. And I'm sure there's plenty of angry old men yelling at clouds in your DMs. Like I even saw one DM you posted that some guy was like, do you think you have too much data? It's like, is there such a thing? But it's amazing that no matter, you can lay facts in front of somebody's face and they still will deny it, which is not benefiting you at all. But I really like the way you think about, like, because I was thinking about more on the course, like during a round, like probabilities and, your tendencies. But I really like the fact of just like focusing on where you need to practice more, where you need to improve is, I think, just the biggest thing that people don't understand, that when you kind of separate golf into the 3 parts and, you find your weaknesses, that's going to be the best way to improve. So I think that's awesome.
Yeah, definitely. It's great to have that info and be armed with that info and track and monitor and see what's changing and how it's changing. It's also phenomenal information for your coach. Most players, when you have players show up for lessons, what does everybody say? I want to be more consistent. 99.9% of people that show up for a lesson say, I want to be more consistent. Showing up and saying, here are my strokes gain numbers over my past 20, 30 rounds. Here's how they're changing. Here's how they're trending. Really useful info. And it removes that bias. I've told this story before too, and I always forget who told me this, but when Justin Rose started to see Sean Foley, he showed up and said, I need to work on my wedge play. I'm a horrible wedge player. It's got to get better. And Sean Foley went off and looked at the data and saw that he was like second on the PGA Tour in wedge play, strokes gained per shot in wedge play. And he was like, what are you talking about? Like, you're legitimately like one of the top 2 or 3 players in the world in wedge play. Like, we don't need to spend time there. I have no idea why Rose thought that. I can speculate. He may have, hit, a loose wedge at a really important time and went, oh, I can't believe I did that. And maybe, it happened again at some point down the road. And now he's got these 2 data points. Now, in between, he probably hit a million incredible wedge shots, but he hit a couple at inopportune times just from bad timing. And he just perhaps got into his head that, oh, my wedge game is letting me down. I need work. When it's just, if you're a really good wedge player, really good putter, really good off the tee, they're not robots. They don't hit every single shot perfectly. They hit shots in a range of outcomes. And he just may have had bad timing when he hit a loose wedge shot. Doesn't mean he's a bad wedge player. It was just the timing of when the loose one came out. And so he was legitimately one of the best 2 or 3 wedge players on the planet. And he thought he needed to work on his wedge play. And so just let that sink in, because we all say, oh, I'm a great putter. I have a great short game. I'm great off the tee. Unless you have the numbers, you might be, you might not be. And the opposite's true. So you can have some people that like Justin, would say, I'm horrible at this. And you might actually really be good. And the interesting part about that is when you have these beliefs that are not based on reality, they can sometimes impact how you play and take somebody that is maybe decent at wedge play and they start to get very anxious about it because they think they are worse than they actually are. And ironically, that starts to make them worse. because they have this, this anxiety that they build up over these kind of shots when they really don't need to. So knowing your info can be, one of the most important things you do to help you improve.
Yeah, that sounds like my putting, because I'm so in my head about it that it just gets me. But speaking to that, and speaking to the loose wedge and just stats in general, you do such a phenomenal job of everything on Twitter, explaining different things. And there's certain players that some things they'll say, oh, I can't get into that. But I think one of your best overall normal kind of stats that you tweet out and put out to people is the distance from the hole at X yardage, and what it really means as a PGA professional, or PGA Tour professional, excuse me, and how close they actually hit shots from 110, 120, 130. Because even me being a decent golfer, scratch golfer, when I'm in 120 yards out, if I miss the green, I think it's the worst golf shot I've ever hit. And the stats really don't play that out. And people can see like, oh, wow, like 120 yards out, I hit the green 5 out of 10 times. That's actually pretty decent for a 10 to 20 handicap golfer.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's very helpful to know that information. So I've put out a ton of info at the professional level, a ton of info at the amateur level for all skill levels, using the Arccos data. And knowing that and understanding that helps you have expectations that are reasonable for your skill level, which is very important. Standing 100 yards from the hole in the middle of the fairway and thinking you're never going to miss the green, or thinking you never should miss the green, is a recipe for disaster. The best players on the planet, miss the green like 19%, 19% from there. And you will miss the green from there. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't want you to pick a really good target, commit to that target, and give it absolutely everything you have to try and hit the ball exactly where you want it to go. You have to do that on every single shot, but you can't beat yourself up when that doesn't happen. And there's going to be a chunk of the time where that doesn't happen. And this, again, I'm going to sound like a broken record. This is why it's so important to actually track your stats. If you're hitting the green 6.5 out of 10 times as a 7 handicap, and I don't know if that's exactly perfect or not, but just go along and pretend that it is, that might be really good. You might be performing above average for your skill level. And you don't have to worry about that. Do we want it to get better? Sure, we want it to get better, but you don't have to worry about that. But if you're only hitting the green 1.5 out of 10 times in that situation, that's an issue. The alarm bell should be going off that, hey, what's going on here? I am really struggling at this yardage. What's the deal? And now that arms you with information to either devise practice plans around that, and or work with your coach around these kind of things. And armed with that info, you can have a plan of how you can get better and what you need to work at. So that is why I stress tracking your stats as much as I do. And that's also why I put a lot of this information out there, is to help give people guidance on what is good or bad for your skill level. And sometimes it is fun to show the tour stats, because they're amazing, they're incredible, but they are not as good as sometimes people think they are. And a lot of that is influenced by what we see on TV. Most people are watching golf primarily on the weekends. If you're a diehard, you watch Thursday, Friday, but mostly on the weekends. And they're mostly showing the players that are at the top of the leaderboard on the weekends, and the players at the top of the leaderboard are playing really, really well. They're on a heater. And when you're on a heater, you hit a lot of good golf shots. So we get kind of skewed with what is typical for tour players by seeing that week after week after week. So it's good to understand the range of outcomes at all skill levels.
Yeah, definitely. And we've talked about that at pretty good lengths on this pod, is just managing expectations at any level is one of the largest parts for just enjoying the game. For your, there's people that have given up golf because they just think they're so bad, when in reality, for the amount of time they put into it, and what their effort level is, like they're actually pretty decent at it. So definitely managing expectations, I feel like is the best thing for that amateurs can do, and even anybody at any level, because beating yourself up on the golf course never really seems to have too positive an effect on your game. But I was going to ask about, obviously we're definitely into the stats here. What is one stat that really like jumps out the first time you saw it? You're like, this can't be, like you had to do a double take on it.
Well, there's probably I've looked at so many things where it's been, wow, I didn't expect to see that. One of the very first things that I did when I started that analytics blog many, many years ago was I looked at how players performed by having the quote unquote good angle on an approach shot. So I grew up, pins on the right, you want to drive the ball up the left side of the fairway to have the better angle, and vice versa when the pin's on the left. And I looked at that for tour pros, and I wanted to understand how much of a benefit it was. I just assumed that it was. And what I found was that it wasn't a benefit. And typically tour players and amateur players as well, I've done this on Arccos data as well, they're scoring the best to the middle of the fairway. And these are two pins that are tucked. I'm talking about pins that are tucked off on the edge, where theoretically it would be, better to have a good angle in that situation. And the hypothesis there is that we have been told when you have a good angle, you can be aggressive, right? You can go after flags when you have a good angle. And when you have a bad angle, you need to be conservative. You need to fire away from flags when you have a bad angle. And so what happens is that, those are in a lot of cases, I'm talking about tour pros, those are really similar in scoring, overall scoring. So from the good angle, they score pretty similar in almost all situations as they do from the bad angle. So good angle and bad angle are pretty similar. And what I think's going on is, or what is going on at the tour level, I can't really tell intention, but what's going on is when they have the good angle, they short-sight it a little bit more because they're being probably aggressive and aiming at more flags, because that's what we've been told our entire life. And when they short-sight it a little bit more, it makes it tougher to get those up and down. And so scoring average is, you might make a small, tiny fraction more birdies, and I mean tiny, not a lot, but that gets offset by the more short-sighted up and downs that you're not going to be able to get up and down. And then when they have the bad angle, they're a little more conservative, and now they're starting farther from the hole for their next shot because they're picking targets that are a little more conservative. And the best scoring typically happened from the middle of the fairway. And what I think happened is they've just kind of found that sweet spot where they've kind of backed their way into an optimal target. They don't have the great angle, so they're not going to be too aggressive. They don't have the bad angle, they're not going to be too conservative. So they've found that middle ground, and they've optimized scoring. And you see the same thing at the amateur level, where the best scoring is almost always from the middle of the fairway and not on the edges when you have the good angles. So that's the one thing that really jumped out at me, and that was many, many years ago.
Yeah, that is super interesting. I didn't even know that that statistic, but it does make sense because I know back when I was really playing really good golf and trying to make it out there, there wasn't that many statistics out there, but bogey avoidance rate was one. Obviously birdie rate and things like that. And I know bogey avoidance rate is almost more important than birdie rate. Like the guys that are playing really good golf don't make near as many bogeys, and that's how you ultimately get better. And so that makes total sense when you say that getting more aggressive actually can end up leading to more bogeys and more mistakes. So that's just one thing that it's unbelievable to think about.
Yeah. Bogey avoidance, avoiding big numbers as amateur players, which I'm guessing your audience is mostly amateur players. And avoiding bigger numbers is the key to scoring better. you're not going to lower your handicap significantly by making a ton more birdies. And to give you an example, a scratch player and an 18 handicap, they have 18 shots of skill level difference between them. 1.8 of those 18 shots are because the scratch player makes more birdies. They make 1.8 more birdies per round. So out of the 18 shots, only 1.8, 10% are because the scratch player makes more birdies. The rest are bogeys, doubles, triples, and quads and worse. So limiting big numbers, and then as you start to get better, as you start to get into 10, 12 and better, limiting bogeys and limiting doubles becomes how you're going to go from a 10 down to a 5, and then a 5 down to a scratch and better.
Wow, that is very fascinating info to find out. I'm glad anybody that listens to this is free information on a free podcast you're listening to, and I think anybody would pay pretty good money just to hear these.
Well, I mean, I'll give you my Venmo. I mean, feel free to send as much as you'd like.
Right? You send
Yeah,
an
that's
invoice
amazing.
over.
Yeah.
So
Perfect.
one term you've used a lot and that we're pretty familiar with, and you can go core of the earth deep with this, or you can keep it pretty surface level, just depending upon how you feel about describing it. But strokes gained, that's a thing that's now when you watch a golf broadcast, you will not see it. And that's become, very popular in the last. Can you just describe to, the viewership of like what that means? And is it static based on the course and the competition, or can you kind of generalize strokes gained as a whole in golf?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest way to think of strokes gained is from every situation. Let's say 100 yards from the middle of the fairway. What if you were to have, for your skill level, if you were to have 10,000 players play from 100 yards in the middle of the fairway, and they finish out, and so they hit their approach shot, and then they either hit or miss the green, they putt out. How many shots did it take them to get in the hole? And then you just average everybody out, and you can say, well, it took 3.2 shots on the average for an 8 handicap, a 7 handicap. I don't know what the number is. I don't have it in front of me to get the ball in the hole from 100 yards. So we have that baseline of 3.2 is the average from 100 yards for my skill level, whatever skill level that is. If I find myself 100 yards from the hole and I get the ball in the hole in 3 shots, I did 0.2 shots better than what the average is. The average is 3.2. I did it in 3. I gained 0.2 strokes. Now, if I took 4 shots to get the ball in the hole, so just imagine this is a par 4 and I hit my drive down to 100 yards, and then, I knock it on and I 3-putt. So I get down in 4 shots. I make bogey. So I made a 5, and it took me 4 shots to get the ball in the hole from 100 yards. The average is 3.2. I lost 0.8 shots. It took me 0.8 more shots to get the ball in the hole than what the average is. And so that's really the basic of how strokes gained works. It's just driven by what's your lie. So are you in the fairway? Are you in the rough? Are you in the sand? Are you on the green? Are you in intermediate cut? Are you in a recovery situation? Depending on what your lie is and how far away from the hole you are, we have the average number of strokes to get the ball in the hole. And then we see how you do, and then we can calculate strokes gained. Now, this happens at the individual shot level. So I'm giving the overall example just to explain how strokes gained works, but this happens at the individual shot level. So I'm going to give a PGA Tour example. From 168 yards in the fairway, PGA Tour players average about 3 shots. From 8 feet on the green, PGA Tour players average 1.5 shots. So if we put a tour player at 168 yards in the fairway, on the average, if they played that a million times, it's going to take them 3 shots on the average to get the ball in the hole. So let's say the first time they play it, they hit their approach shot to 8 feet. And I just a moment ago, I mentioned that from 8 feet, it's 1.5 shots. So they started 3 shots from the hole. They hit 1 shot, and they ended up in a spot that's only going to take them on the average 1.5 shots to get in the hole. So in that situation, they gained 1/2 shot. So and here's another way to think of it. It's an analogy that I've given many times, and this kind of helps some people. The light bulb kind of goes on for some people. If I were to ask you, Mitchell, how far away are you from work?
20 minutes.
It's perfect. You answered it. It's like we planned this beforehand. You didn't tell me I'm 8.7 miles from work. You said I'm 20 minutes from work. And that's how most people answer that question. So I want to relate that back to our PGA Tour player at 168 yards in the fairway. If I were to say, hey, PGA Tour player, how far are you from the hole? The way you just answered that, he would have said, I'm 3 shots from the hole. Right?
Yeah.
I'm 3 shots from the hole. And you said, I'm 20 minutes from work. He could have also said, I'm 168 yards from the hole. And you could have also answered, I'm 8.7 miles from the hole. So it's just another way to think of how far away you are from the hole. So you think of your distance to work in 2 ways. How many minutes is it going to take me to get there? And how many miles is it? And so that's really all strokes gained is. And then we, from where you start, we look at where you finish. And then from there, we see how many shots it's going to take you to get the ball in the hole on the average. And now we can calculate if you did better or worse. Hopefully that makes sense. Makes sense in my head, but my head's got a lot of wacky stuff, running around up there. So.
No, that makes a load of sense. And when you said that, I immediately realized what I said. And I was like, when you asked me how far away I was, it wasn't a literal question of, what, that's how a normal person describes it. So that makes complete sense. That is insane to me.
Cool. Good. Now I just need to encourage you to start tracking your stats.
I know. And that's definitely something once I start playing more golf this summer, I'll definitely do that. So another statistic, does Arccos track score? Do you have scoring stats on the back end of Arccos?
What do you mean by that? Just typical,
just full round scores.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
It keeps your score, bogey, par, birdie, eagle, whatever you scored, keeps your running total of all that, gives you a ton of stats, not just strokes gained, but you can see, some of the traditional stats, fairway percent, greens and reg percent, putts, things like that. But, the most important things that are in the app are strokes gained. That's really looking at your golf game. Those other stats can be useful at times, but traditional stats can be, they can be misleading. Which is why Arccos heavily stresses strokes gained, and which is, it's top of mind. It's, the front of the app, and it's how we try to communicate with players to help them understand what's working, what isn't working, to allow them to focus on the things that are going to help to get them better quicker.
Totally. That makes sense. Well, so I was curious, it's an age-old debate of what percentage of people can actually break 100. They're like, oh, only 5% of people can break 100, only 10% of people. Is there an actual statistic showing what percentage of people break 100 on a regular basis?
I don't. It's a really interesting question. Because the best source we have for overall skill level is from the USGA. And the USGA has about 2.5, 3 million people that are keeping an index. And there's 25 million golfers in the United States. So my inkling is that if you have an index, you probably skew towards being a better player, a more serious player. And if you don't have an index, you probably skew away from that. And so we can look at the USGA and we can see what percentage of golfers, to break 100, you need, your index, your scoring average is typically your course handicap +3. So if you are getting 10 strokes, that's your course handicap, not your index. If you're getting 10 strokes on your home course and it's a par 72, you're probably going to have a scoring average of about 85. So for somebody to have a scoring average of 100, they would be a 25 handicap. And I can look here. I just pulled up the USGA stats while we're talking. In the USGA, in order for you to break 100, you probably need to be, I'm just looking at the male side here. It's the first thing that came up. Yeah, there's a lot of people that are breaking 100 that are keeping an index with the USGA, but that is not reflective of the overall population. I'd venture to guess, boy, it's hard for me to make a really accurate guess on this because I don't really know what the rest of the golf population looks like. There's so many casual players out there that go out, 5, 6, 7 times a year and shoot 110, 120. And that's not even really playing by the rules, which is, something, as your handicap gets higher and you don't keep an index, you're probably less likely to play by all the rules, which makes, really challenging to get an accurate gauge on what your score is. I would say there's a huge chunk of people that are not breaking 100. I don't know what that number is, but it's a huge chunk. It's a long-winded answer to say I don't know, because we only know about,
and I would take
10%.
it for gospel. So
no. We only have decent info on 10% of the golfers in the U.S.
That's very fair.
Yeah.
So talking about strokes gained, there may be more, but to my knowledge, the 4 that pop up are off the tee, approaching the green, around the green, and putting. If you had to rank those 4, how would you do that? And then number 2, does that change if you're trying to get better? Does that change for an amateur versus a PGA Tour player? Like what a PGA Tour player, like he's not winning tournaments. Okay, he needs to look at what he needs to get better at. Obviously, he's maybe losing some strokes, but if everything was equal in his game, would there be a definite one that he would put more emphasis on? And does that differ from, like, let's just say a 10 handicap to make it easy-ish?
Well, generically, ball striking is incredibly important. So being able to hit the ball solidly off the tee and with your approach shots, extremely important. And very, very, very much related to how well you are ultimately going to be as a golfer, how good you're going to get, how well you're going to play, what kind of scores you're going to shoot. Of all the traditional stats out there, greens and regulation has a very strong relationship to what your handicap's going to be. There's not many scratch players out there that are averaging 5 greens around. It just doesn't happen. They hit way more greens than that. So generically, ball striking is the most important thing. You need to be able to hit your driver and your irons really well, really consistently. And the more speed and distance you have with your driver, the better off you're going to be. But not everybody is exactly the same. So think back to the example from at the beginning of the pod when we talked about the 10 handicap players, where one of them putts like a 20 and one of them putts like a scratch. Now, generically, I would tell most 10 handicaps, if you want to get down to scratch, you need to become a better ball striker. But in this case, we have a 10 handicap that's putting horribly and could reduce their handicap pretty quickly. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit there, and they could drive that handicap down 2 or 3 shots. To have a 10 handicap putting as poorly as they do, they're probably hitting the ball like a 6 handicap. And the 10 handicap that's putting incredibly well is probably hitting the ball like a 14 handicap, somewhere in there, just guesstimating. So those are 2 very, if I showed up to you with that data with 2 different players, you're going to approach that differently with each one, which is why it's so important to know where you fit. Generically, if you want to be play on tour and you want to be an incredible ball strike or incredible player, get really good at ball striking. But, absent being an incredible elite, plus handicap level ball striker, you need to know you and what your numbers are, because you might not be the same as the typical 10 index or 12 or 15 or whatever you are. You could be a great chipper, great putter, and a bad iron player. You need to work on your iron play, or it could be the opposite. You could be a horrific putter, horrific short game, and a really good ball striker. So knowing your numbers is going to help you drive where you're able to focus on. And that's true at the tour level as well. You have guys on the PGA Tour that, lose a shot around off the tee. You have guys that lose a shot around in putting, in around the green, in every facet of the game. Those players, they want to get better. Those are the categories that they would work on, the ones they're extremely weak in. It's very, very hard to, Rory's kind of at the top of the heap as far as driver goes. He's one of the best drivers of the golf ball of all time. He's not going to get much better. Like, there's not a lot of room for growth there. Like, he's at the peak, the pinnacle. Like, he's not going to get a shot better per round with his tee shots. It's just not going to happen. But if you have somebody who's a horrific putter on the PGA Tour and is losing, a shot a round, they have the ability to get a shot better per round just by getting average with their putting. So knowing what your fingerprint looks like is going to allow you to focus on the things you need to focus on.
Yeah, that's that makes total sense. Speaking of Rory and driving the ball, there's been some recent discussions from the USGA RNA about quote unquote rolling the ball back and taking, the very high speed guys like Rory that can produce 185, 190 plus ball speeds, and somehow dialing that back a little bit. In your opinion, so this is an opinion thing, not like a statistics thing, who do you think it's going to affect in the professional game? Because Rory, I mean, he made a point the other day that actually made a lot of sense to me. Like, he feels like he will actually kind of separate himself from the pack, being as good of a driver as he is, if the ball is dialed back. So is it really going to hurt the guys that are, the a little bit above average off the tee versus, the very good guys off the tee? Or what is your opinion on that?
Yeah. Did you not read his tweets today, man?
Well, no, I did. Was he talking about that?
It was about like hitting all the clubs in the bag and how much he really actually does. So I'll let the experts say it, but
yeah. And so kind of I did tweet about that today, but just to kind of answer your question there, rolling back the golf ball is going to be a bigger advantage to the long players. And here's why. The farther you get away from the hole, the bigger the gap is in scoring. And I'm talking about approach shot distances. So if I were to look at Rory hits the ball about 20 yards farther than tour average. So let's say right now, and I have some data right here in front of me, so I can speak to it and not give any wrong numbers. So let's say right now that just for the sake of this discussion here, that the average, all approach shots on par fours are from 120 yards, every single one of them for Rory, or for tour average, 120 yards. From 120 yards, they average 2.85 shots. Now, Rory is about 20 yards longer than tour average. And so Rory is going to average 2.8 from 100 yards. Tour average is going to be at 120. He's going to be at 100. The difference in scoring is about 0.05 shots, 2.85 to 2.8. So 0.05 shots. Now I'm just going to roll this back, and let's say they really rolled the ball back. And now let's say that the tour average for approach shots is 180 yards. From 180 yards, it's 3.08 shots. From 160, because remember, Rory's 20 yards farther than tour average. From 160, it's 2.98 shots. So it's a tenth of a shot difference. So when you get farther from the hole in this approach shot range, the gap in scoring gets bigger for the same 20-yard gap. It becomes a tenth of a shot difference from 180 to 160 versus 0.05 shots difference from 120 to 100. So Rory now has this advantage of 0.5 of a shot or 0.05 of a shot, 0.05 shots if they roll the ball back and this happens. So when you get a little farther from the hole because they keep the tees in the same spot and they make the ball go shorter, it's going to be a bigger advantage to the longer hitters. And in the USGA Distance Insight report, they studied this. They looked at the value of distance over time, and the value of distance was largest in the 80s. That's when it was the largest, in the 1980s. And it's because of this reason exactly right here. This is a contributing factor where as you get a little farther from the hole, the advantage is going to be to Rory, which, I have no idea why Rory is lobbying for the rollback now, because previously he wasn't, but now he is. I don't know if someone has whispered in his ear and said, hey, man, this is going to benefit you. It's going to make it even tougher for players to beat you because you have this huge advantage with your distance. So hopefully that all made sense. But this is going to be an advantage to the longer hitters.
Yeah. Well, one thing Rory also said that I guess it kind of relays into the rollback of the ball, but just scoring in general, is he came out a couple weeks ago during, now I can't remember the tournament, where the scoring was like 8,
Arnold
9
Palmer,
under
I think. Yeah, it was Arnold Palmer,
Yeah.
wasn't it? Yeah.
Yep. And he said, this isn't the tournament people want to see. And I personally disagree completely with that. But I think overall, just looking at tournaments in general, yeah, you have tournaments like that stick out, like the John Deere, where guys are 28, 29 under. Last year, Cam Smith and John Rahm going at it early in the year, 32 under. But I personally don't think it's over the top. Now, the distance part of it being apart from the actual scoring, I think a tournament in the 15 to 20 under is perfectly acceptable. And that's where they're at right now with the current ball. Rolling it back, it's obviously going to change strokes gained. It's going to change how everyone scores, but I don't think it's gotten to a point where it's out of hand. Let me put it that way. If every tournament was 25, 30, 35 under, something crazy, guys are shooting low 60s, 4 straight rounds, and there's 10 guys doing it, then it's like, all right, maybe we need to make a change. But I personally don't feel that it's gotten to that point. What do you think about it? Or is it not necessarily scoring? It's just the purely a distance thing in general?
Yeah, I think this ultimately ends up being a very subjective conversation where you have an opinion on what you like to see and what your preference is. The data doesn't support a rollback, and that there's probably people listening to it that are going to jump out of their seat with me saying that. At least the data, the way I look at it, because I get that everybody has a different opinion on this. I'm not a proponent of the rollback. I don't think there's any reason for a rollback. I think there's a lot of reasons against rolling it back. And scoring is not, in my opinion, out of control. And there's some people that will make a lot of arguments like we need to see more long irons. We need to see that part of the game be a little bit different, but that's not necessarily how it used to be. You can go back and look at some of the courses they played in the 80s and 90s and see some of the scorecards, and the courses were significantly shorter, and guys were hitting it anywhere from 260 to upper 260s in those days. And if you go through the scorecard and just look at the yardage on what the card was and just back into what their approach shot distance would be if they hit the ball, what the average distance was on tour, you go, wait, that's a lot of 140, 150 yard shots. I just tweeted this out about Augusta from 1986 and kind of went hole by hole in 1986 and said, here's what the yardage was on the scorecard. Here's how far the approach shot would be on the par fours if somebody hit it the average distance of one of the top 10 longest players on tour. And all the distances, 8 of the 10 par fours were 156 yards or less. 6 of the 10 par fours were 126 yards or less. There was only 2 shots outside of 175. And those aren't a lot of long irons. So I know it's a heated debate, a heated topic. I'm interested to see what the PGA Tour does. It's a model local rule. They don't have to adopt it. I think they probably will, but they don't have to. I'm not sure that I would. They are $1 billion+ business that is going to have their product impacted by a governing body that doesn't have any real vested interest in what happens to the PGA Tour, if you want to think of it that way. So I wouldn't adopt it, but it's going to be interesting I'm going to go out on a limb here and say I'm 100% confident there's going to continue to be Twitter debates on this topic.
Yeah, I don't think that's necessarily too hot of a take there. And with Rory even saying too, he's like, well, if they don't adopt it or whatever, I might still play it. I'm like, you're full of BS. Like you're not going to gladly hand over 20 yards every tee shot, just to, and maybe do you have a differing opinion, or overall, like if he knows his stats, he's got to know that being closer gives him an advantage.
I mean, I have no idea. I have no idea if he knows that or not. And I want to say too that I'm a huge Rory fan. I've tweeted a gazillion times about Rory, and I have been a fan for him forever and cheer him on. And hopefully he can close out the career Grand Slam and get the job done at Augusta, which is coming up here in a few weeks. I'd love to see that. So I'm a Rory fan. I don't necessarily agree with some of his takes on this, but it doesn't mean I'm not a fan. And at the end of the day, I don't have a vested interest one way or the other. And it's not going to impact me. I'm not going to be affected by this model local rule. I'm glad that they didn't touch the amateur game directly. I think there's some really interesting challenges that you're going to have to figure out with, where you draw the line, and going from one kind of ball to another as you're trying to make jump to tour pros. It's also very interesting from the manufacturer standpoint. There's a significant amount of time, money, R&D dollars that have gone into creating the golf balls that we have now. And now they need to unwind all of that in some ways while keeping the performance that other players or that players expect and need. And I don't know what that means. Right now there's a lot of different balls that players can choose from that are made for them, but I can also go and buy them. They make them for me too. I can go buy them. And is a ball manufacturer going to put in a significant amount of money to tool up and design multiple kinds of balls for multiple swing profiles and player preferences, so that they can give them away? Like, tour players aren't paying for their golf balls; they're getting them for free. So our equipment company is going to invest millions and millions and millions of dollars to make a product that they can't even really sell. They're going to be giving way more of these away than they're going to sell. And so it's a losing venture for them. So I'm curious to see how the manufacturers handle this. And if they don't take it on, I don't know who would or who could. Making a golf ball and making a good golf ball is pretty challenging. And what I'm afraid of is that they're going to make just simply a limited number of golf balls, a very limited number of golf balls. So they almost have, here's the one ball that's available. It's an exaggeration, but here's the one conforming ball that's available, and this is what you need to use. And you're going to have, by dumb luck, some players where the characteristics of that ball suits their swing, and it gives them an equipment advantage by just through sheer dumb luck, having a ball that suits their profile of what they need. So, we could talk about this one all night. We could have a 4-part series on this one. It's a heated debate, an interesting topic. And, what we have until January 2026. So curious to see where it all heads with the PGA Tour.
Yeah, we could beat that into the ground probably, but yeah, it would be kind of crazy to think like with baseball, they have an official game ball. If like the PGA Tour went to, okay, this is the official PGA Tour ball, like this is what every single guy has to play. Crazy to wrap my head around that one. So I have one last question and wanted to thank you again for coming on. This has been a blast. But related to Twitter, you tweeted a video this afternoon with a couple of eyes on it. It was a video of Will Zalatoris' putting stroke that looked to be a little bit of a little jabby, I guess you could call it. So what were your thoughts behind the eyes on that tweet?
Oh yeah, I saw my podcast co-hosts tweet that out. I just looked at it and I initially forgot it was match play. Initially I forgot it was match play. Well, yeah, like when I saw the ball go by and he reached to rake it, I was like, what the, and then it hit me. I'm like, oh, wait a minute, that's match play. It's match play. But yeah, missing a 2-footer, it happens. I tweet out stuff like that when, guys, I've tweeted out plenty of times and guys occasionally shank one or, stuff like that. I tweet that out and it's, you hate to see that. Hate to see anybody miss putts like that or hit them on the hosel, but sometimes I think it's good for us amateurs to see those things. So yeah, nothing behind it other than like, I was shocked to see somebody miss a 2-footer.
Oh, that's for
really
sure.
it.
I just saw that Fawcett replied to it and had a little bit of disdain for the tweet. Is he Zalatoris' putting coach?
No, I didn't even see that. So I normally don't go into my comments.
Which I don't blame you for.
I get too many of them yeah, so I don't really check out the mentions in the comments too often. So I didn't see that, but yeah, Will is a student of Scott's, or was. So that was, I think, officially Scott's first person that he worked with Decade on. So yeah, I'm nothing by it at all other than, dude missed a 2-footer. It's no different than when I've tweeted about guys, video of guys hitting shanks and things like that. So yeah,
Sure.
nothing there.
I think somebody may have just read into it a little bit more than,
yeah,
if the shoe fits kind of thing.
No, I've been a Zalatoris fan and was really excited to see him get his first win when he got it not too long ago. And, it's good to see him back out there and not be injured. But yeah, I've tweeted plenty of times about, I think after his first win, I was like, the floodgates are open up. The guy's just too good not to win a whole bunch of tournaments. And he'll win majors as well, too. He's contended so many times early on in his career. So he's going to win a bunch of tournaments and more than one major by the time it's all said and done. So yeah, boy, if anyone took offense to that, boy, absolutely none intended. So especially Will, if Will's listening, yeah, none intended.
None intended.
Totally
well, this is going to be the last one for me, and I'll echo what Mitchell said. Thanks so much. I could go till 3 a.m. just asking you questions, but I'm going to go a little more on the opinionated side. So we've kind of, I don't know if you are a gambler or have ever played craps or superstitious at all, but when you're playing craps and you bet on the 6 and the 8, let's say, and the 9 keeps hitting and 9 keeps hitting. And I'm a person that's superstitious and don't bet the 9. Cause I'm like, I'm on the 6 and 8. If I bet the 9, it'll lose. We do gamble occasionally. And especially on golf, we put out our picks each week and, just want to be right essentially more than anything. But we can't get on the Scotty Scheffler train. And is there anything you can give us to make us like this guy? And is there anything that sticks out in his game to you that you're like, okay, this run is, Tiger's in his own world and we've known that forever. But then there's people that have these mini runs where you're like, this guy's the next Tiger, and that'll never happen. But Scotty's on that run currently where for us betting wise, it's like, why don't you bet him every tournament? But what impresses you about him and what something, if you have it, that you can give us to like about him?
Well, I don't gamble, and technically, for the record, when you have access to the shot link data like I do, and provide that to tour pros, you have to sign something that says you don't gamble at all. So I don't gamble, so I don't want to give you any gambling advice on this. But I mean, he's the number one player in the world. He's a really good player. He's got 6 wins now. The guy continues to play well. Is it going to last for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 8 years? I have no clue, but he's an incredible player. And he's proven himself on some pretty big stages, and continues to play really well. Rahm and Rory were battling there for a while, and it was, who's better, and Scheffler just kind of stays, doing what he's doing, and just, racking up some more wins and some good finishes. I mean, he's a great player. I don't know what's not to like about the guy. He's a phenomenal player. Absolutely,
That's
phenomenal player. Yeah.
We
Yeah,
just, we
that
just
is
don't like
fair.
his lack of personality is our issue.
They don't, like, I don't gamble on golf, but you're not making bets on the personality of the player. You're making bets on how they're going to score, right? And the guy knows how to get the ball in the hole.
Yeah. Is there anything, I'll just piggyback on that, and then we'll let you go. Is there anything that stands out in his game stat wise? Because it feels like when you're watching, and granted, PGA Tour commentary is a completely different scenario that I don't want to go down, but overall, it feels like he's obviously at the top of almost everything, but there's nothing like when you say Rory, you're like, he's one of the best drivers, if not the best driver of the golf ball ever. Certain guys are the greatest putters ever. It doesn't feel like there's something that stands out, but that could just be me in the surface level and not seeing everything.
Yeah, I'm not intimately familiar with all of his. I mean, he's having an incredible year off the tee. He's first in strokes gained off the tee, averaging almost a shot per round. And he is, let's see here, first off the tee, 7th in strokes gained approach, 96th in putting. I don't have his around the green in front of me here. No, he's 21st in around the green. So that's pretty good. Like, he's hitting the ball really well. His short game is pretty spicy, and his putting is kind of middle of the road. So yeah, he's playing really. Anytime you're averaging a shot, 1 stroke gain per round off the tee, like that's incredible. That's really, really good. He's at 0.990. That's phenomenal. So, and he's won 10.4 million this year, which isn't too shabby. It's only March. It's only March. He still has 4 majors to play. The dude could legit win $20 million this year, maybe more, plus whatever he wins in FedEx on top of that. He could have a $35 million season. It's not out of the question.
Career for a lot of golfers this
year. Yeah, it's amazing. So
he already has 10. 10 is a good career.
He's playing really well, and I got to walk a practice round with him at the U.S. Open this year, and got to talk to him for a few holes while we were on the practice round. And he's just the nicest guy. Like, he's just a genuinely nice, down to earth, normal person that happens to be insanely good at golf. So I definitely am a fan and root for him. So I would love to see him, continue rolling along on the train.
Well, we'll try to join in on that, because we've been kind of off him for a while now. So
yeah, he's a New Jersey guy too. Born in New Jersey. I don't know if you knew that.
Yeah, I did hear about. That's crazy. Yeah. I just always associate him as a Texas dude. So.
Yeah, but born in Jersey. So go Jersey.
Okay, maybe that's something to like about him then. There you
go. There. Perfect.
Found it. Well, Lou, thanks again so much, man. It means a lot to us that you took the time to talk to us, and thank you for all you do for not just this podcast and did for this podcast, but for the golf world. It truly, if you're on Twitter and following you, there's so many things you can learn, and going back to managing expectations, all of that stuff that you give out, like maybe the best follow on Twitter. And it's awesome what you do for the golf world. And we've had a boom, and a ton of people are golfing more and more, and hopefully, they get into Arccos and they start tracking their stuff after hearing this and realizing how important it really is. Go listen to his podcast, the Hack It Out podcast. Subscribe to his newsletter. It's a great read every single week with interesting things. I liked your one of fairways are overrated. I felt that one.
Good.
Love
that's
the one for me. But yeah, make sure you guys subscribe to his newsletter, listen to his podcast, follow him on Twitter if you're not already, at GolfStatPro. And we appreciate your time.
On Twitter. It's at Lou Stagner on Twitter.
Oh, it's at Lou Stagner. It's GolfStatPro in the
yeah. My daughter, when I started my
parentheses.
blog, my daughter created that name 5+ years ago, back when I never used Twitter. And so I put it in parentheses there, and that was the name of my website, GolfStatPro. And I can't remove it. Like, she was young at the time, and it was her idea, so it's going to stay there. But
I can only imagine when you got into Twitter, just it's just a horrible world in general, but you make it better. But I just can only imagine just getting into Twitter and doing all that, and your replies are just something. So shouts to you for dealing with all that.
No, thanks for following along, and thanks again for having me on, and for all the shout outs. Very much appreciated, and would love to do it again sometime, and we can reminisce about how many more wins Scotty has had between now and whenever we get together again.